Good morning. And welcome to Neighborhood Unitarian Universalist Church here in Pasadena, California. Welcome to all members, friends, and guests here in person and virtually. Neighborhood Church creates and grows an inclusive community of faith connected by love, spirit, and service. My name is James Coombs, and I'm honored to serve as a member of your Board of Trustees. Thank you for joining us here as we continue to prioritize connection over perfection in this hybrid service, which is streamed on YouTube and which we are recording for future viewing. Seating is available in the back for those who want to be sure not to appear in the recording. We will be continuously learning to adapt and create joyful opportunities to be together while keeping this community safe. Today's service is led by the Reverend Dr. Teresa Cooley, the Reverend Sarah Gibb Millspaw, and Dr. Zenaida Robles, featuring Wells Lang and the Neighborhood Church Choir. Good morning, everybody. There are many ways to connect with our church community throughout the week, both in person and virtually. Whether you're new or you're looking to find new ways to engage, please visit our website and social media to learn more. Here are a few ways to connect. After today's service, from 1:30 to 4 p.m., we will be continuing some of the themes from this morning's service and holding a congregational meeting and workshop on the Labyrinth in the Programs Building courtyard, as well as online via Zoom. Our transitions team and the Reverend Dr. Sarah Gibb Millspaw of the UUA's Western Region Office will be providing feedback from the listening sessions and insight on the ministerial search process. We will also be discussing the letter about a previous minister's misconduct that was sent out to the congregation this past week. This is an example of this congregation's goal to be transparent and honest with each other. This is a time for healing and for preparing our community for new ministry and ministerial leadership over the next few years. For our guests and visitors today, we can assure you that this is not a normal Sunday, but it is important to see how our community heals and manages change and transition. It may seem strange for those of us who are new to us, but we hope you will see us as a congregation trying to do well. Next Sunday, December 19th, we will be holding our Christmas pageant indoors for the worship service, which will feature children, youth, and young adults, including one of mine from our church school. We will be setting the first 4 rows for families and children and creating substantial distance between this section and the rest, as well as a specially distant section. And on Christmas Eve, we will have a family service inside at 5:30 p.m., as well as an adult service at 8 p.m., which will also be live streamed. I'm also happy to report this coming January, the governance work group will be hosting 6 listening sessions to gather input and explore how we want to work together in the decision-making process of this congregation. We were building on the work of both the transition team and the 8th Principle work groups and hope you will sign up and join us for those sessions. The upcoming newsletter will have more information about this process. This week's Share the Plate recipient is the Women's Center for Creative Work, and I am pleased to welcome Director of Programs Mandy Harris-Williams this morning, who will tell us more about the organization later on in the service. Again, welcome to Neighborhood Church, whoever you are and wherever you are on your spiritual journey. Welcome to this inclusive faith community connected by love, spirit, and service. And now please welcome Jan McCreary, who will share about Dining for Dollars.
This is the precursor to the iPad. So last week, we generated considerable excitement and buzz about hosting and attending Dining for Dollars events. The comment that lifted my spirits was, "It sounds like such fun, and I haven't had any fun in a year." Next, we received our very first event host form turned in on the very day from Reverend Dr. Teresa, who volunteered her considerable skills to bake the specialty cake of your choice, should you be the winning bidder. Our first Dining for Dollars season ticket donation happened. Deanne Morris donated 2 tickets to the Tony Award-winning revision of Dickens' A Christmas Carol. These are two primo seats in the orchestra at the Amundsen Theater. Showtime is December 24th at noon. This show has been sold out for weeks. It is a ticket value of $300. It goes to the highest bidder, which may not be $300. We don't know. When we think about hosting an event, dinners are lovely, but so are appetizers and breezy brunches in the shade of your backyard. Some folks take their guests to a restaurant where there's proof of vaccination or an outdoor venue. Consider your own hobby something you could demonstrate or teach to a small group, or let the group be its own entertainment. Just have them in, feed them, and have them offer 5 minutes about their family history, an important event in their life, or that you favorite topic, the meaning of life. If you are a member of a gallery or a museum, botanical gardens, can you arrange a tour? Can you be the tour guide? There may be discounts that'll help you keep your costs down as a host. Sometimes a venue has a cafeteria, and guests can buy their own lunch if you don't want to foot that entire bill. Even though the event host forms are due in January, your event can take place anytime in 2022, from February through December. Consider asking someone to co-host your event and share the work and the expenses. Plus, it's more fun with a co-host. We do need you to register your Dining for Dollars event by January 7. That's only 3 weeks from now. That's hard to believe. January 7, 2022. Just pick up a paper form, take it home with you. You can mail it back filled out, or you can use it as a reminder to go online and fill out the event host form that is on the church website and also linked to our newsletter. The actual bidding to attend events will take place after both services on January 30th and February 6th, except for today when we have the Amundsen tickets to the Christmas Carol, and we have that sheet for bidding right out at our little kiosk. In closing, don't you love to hear those words from a speaker? In closing, Dining for Dollars and More is such fun. I encourage you to participate as a host, participate as a co-host, or be a participant, or all of the above. Thank you.
Good morning. Good morning. Come, you accidental pilgrims, you who find yourself on a journey of surprise and wonder. Come, you who emerge into this place as an act of liberation. Come, you who seek a life of mindfulness and a place to test your thoughts. Come, you who bring hearts of all kinds, heavy hearts, rusty hearts, hearts broken open in revelation, hearts full of love to share. Come, you who seek courage, and you who have more courage than you realize. Come, you who stand behind the curtain, gathering up the resources to claim your truth. We begin our story again, gathering courage, love, mindfulness, and a sense of purpose. We gather as people of all ages, of different abilities, different backgrounds, and different perspectives. But we share a covenant, a direction for our sacred journey, and a commitment to encourage and challenge one another to spiritual growth. This path will ask much of us. So let us move forward with love. Let us move forward with appreciation for one another. Let us move forward knowing we are not alone. Whoever you are, whatever your gifts, you are welcome to join this journey. Come, let us worship together.
Hymn is number 1014 in the Teal Hymnal. Please rise in body or in spirit and join us in singing Answering the Call to Love. Do note the change in the wording. Instead of standing on the side of love, we are now singing Answering the Call to Love with instructions from the composer as a way of changing our language to make it less aimless.
Our God.
And now, a misprint on my part, please welcome Sarah Williams.
Good morning, and no, not your fault. Mandy Harris-Williams was my coworker, and she was going to be here, but and she's a much more compelling public speaker, so I'm sorry, but you get me. My name is Sarah Williams, and I'm one of the co-founders and the executive director of the Feminist Center for Creative Work. It's nice to be back here, and thank you so much for selecting us as part of your holiday giving initiative. I know they've been playing the video the past week, but for those who are not familiar, Feminist Center for Creative Work is a Los Angeles-based arts nonprofit founded in 2015, and our mission is to nurture an ever-evolving, intersectional, intergenerational, and joyful collaborative feminist praxis, modeling ways of working and living through art, programming, media, publishing, and the redistribution of resources from Los Angeles within the world. While it's a bit heady, we use the word praxis very intentionally. Like you all here, we as a community at FCCW are invested not just in the concept of values, but in how we embody these values and live them out in our habits, conventions, and practices daily. We work with incredible artists and writers through our Artist in Residency program, publishing practices, and programming, and make work we are proud to present to our engaged audiences near and far. How we do things, though, is what is most important to us and is where we find the most meaning in the work. In everything we do, we are guided by our core values, ones that feel very aligned with the shared convictions of your congregation. FCCW is a place that affirms that art, creativity, and imagination have intellectual, personal, and political value, one that cultivates a spirit of hospitality and care, one that is explicitly intersectional and working towards a feminism prioritizing women of color, queer, trans, and non-binary people, and other historically marginalized communities. We are a space for active participation, a collective project where self-determination is encouraged, a platform for creative support and the redistribution of resources, a place that cultivates a spirit of abundance, generosity, and joy. Ultimately, we are modeling a world we wish to see by creating space for radical imagining, visioning, and manifesting. As Tony Cade Bambara said so perfectly, the role of the artist is to make the revolution irresistible. We believe wholeheartedly at FCCW that art is an important practice for building and imagining the more equitable future we all desire, and do our best to foster the work of artists whose practices will guide the way. Speaking from the heart, this invitation to come and speak and share a bit about our work and to be supported through your holiday giving couldn't have come at a better time. As is the case for many people and organizations, the pandemic has significantly shifted how we're able to work and the funding avenues we have available to us. We have been adapting the past few years and find ourselves with an incredible and creative team, with an inspiring vision for the organization within our new reality, but unfortunately without the necessary material resource to support it fully. So this opportunity comes at a crucial time, and we're incredibly grateful for your support. Thank you so much for having us here, and happy holidays.
Text to give, or with the box or QR code that's outside the sanctuary. Thank you.
The fifes and drums. Ah, my friend, la la la. What a time I have had.
Je dansais tout dans Blessing of hope. So we may know the hope that is not just for someday, but for this day, here, now, this moment, that opens to us hope not made of wishes, but of substance. Hope made of sinew and muscle and bone. Hope that has breath and a beating heart. Hope that will not keep quiet and be polite. Hope that knows how to holler when it is called for. Hope that knows how to sing when there seems little cause. Hope that raises us from the dead, not someday, but this day, every day, again and again and again. Many of us bring thoughts of others that are dear to us into this service this morning, whether they be those who might be struggling, those who might be celebrating, those we may have lost, or ourselves who are struggling or celebrating or feeling lost. Let us take a moment of silence and welcome them and welcome those feelings of tenderness into our circle of attention and love. May all find sustenance and shelter, connection and healing, community, hope, and even joy. Amen, and blessed be.
bring no harm to you. So rest in the arms of your mother, who sing to Alaru. Alaru, Amen, Alaru, Amen, Alaru, Amen, Alaru,
In the summer of 2020, once they reopened the beaches, a friend and I met up at the beach for a long walk. As the tide started to come in, I took off my sandals and to wade in the water, and it felt lovely for about a minute. Then, ow! There was a sudden burning feeling in my big toe, and I jumped. I looked down where my foot had been, and I saw a small bee body lying in the sand. Oof, I had been stung by a bee right on the tip of my big right toe. No lifeguard station was in sight that might have had supplies for a bee sting, so I kept walking. Quite a long way of walking, in fact. I leaned toward the outside of my foot as I stepped to keep the pressure off of my throbbing toe. By the time I got back to the car, the opposite side, my pinky toe side of my foot was in pain. The toe, the arch, the heel, and the ankle all hurt. Even had some pain shooting up to my knee. I was so confused. As my bee sting pain started to subside, my opposite side of my foot had pain ramping up. I put up my feet when I got home, and I saw on the pinky toe side of my right foot a bump forming, a red bump. Remember, it was my big toe side that got the bee sting. I got up and it hurt to put my foot down. I started walking around the house with a limp. Over the next few days, the pain and the limp persisted, and the whole system of my legs and my knees and my hips was getting off kilter. I was even getting increased neck and shoulder pain, all because of a bee sting on my big toe. My foot hurt so much that I stopped walking the dog, and it was COVID lockdown time, so I didn't have much reason to go out. But hunkering down inside with no exercise, I became more anxious, more irritable, and less able to cope well with all the worldwide pandemic going on around me. The bee was gone, the swelling was gone, you couldn't even see the site of the sting anymore, but I was in pain all over. I tell you this story because I think you, as Neighborhood Church, have been through something like this too. An injury of the spirit, a wound, a betrayal of trust, inflicted by someone who's no longer here, but the church body still feels the pain. Earlier this week, members and friends of Neighborhood UU Church received a letter informing you that your former minister, the Reverend Lissa Gundlach, had been put on probation by the Unitarian Universalist Association's Ministerial Fellowship Committee. She's on a 3-year probation for engaging in abusive supervision of staff here at Neighborhood. This is ministerial misconduct. I'll be here with you this afternoon for a workshop where we can learn more about and process what it means for you to take in this news of misconduct happening here and how you make sense of it moving forward. Because the pain of misconduct doesn't just affect its primary victim or victims. Misconduct affects everyone in a congregational system. And even after the misconducting minister departs, the pain in the system persists until it is treated. What kind of pain do our congregational systems get into when misconduct happens? I'll tell you a story. When I was growing up, the minister of my UU congregation engaged in misconduct. He ended up leaving ministry as a result, but the wounds of the misconduct continued in the congregation because people had spent years keeping secrets. Leaders who had been close to the minister had absorbed his for me or against me attitude toward members of the church. You know, I don't like them, they're the minister's people. I don't like them, they're against the minister. Toward the end of his ministry, members had angry arguments with each other, with friendships breaking down, grudges developing, and trust broken. And not just trust broken in the ministry, but trust broken with each other. Lots of people left. Even 15 years later, after another difficult time in the congregation, they had such a fear of approaching conflict that when they were looking for a minister, like you will be next year, they wrote in their congregational record, "We're terrified of conflict. If there's any kind of conflict, we're afraid that we will split and divide." They couldn't even approach conflict in a constructive way because the wounds from that misconduct were still playing out among them. For the past 6 years, part of my ministry with the UUA Pacific Western region has been working with congregations that are recovering from the effects of ministerial misconduct. And one thing I've learned over and over again is that the trauma to the system of the congregation, the body, if we return to my earlier metaphor, the trauma keeps creating pain for the people of the congregation long after the perpetrator of the trauma has departed. But there is one way to disrupt that cycle of pain and begin to restore that broken trust. And that is something you are beginning to do today in a deeper way, but something you've been doing all through the interim ministry and will continue to do. The way to disrupt the pain is to go back to the source, to be honest about the injury, to receive a correct diagnosis of the primary injury, the secondary injuries, and even the tertiary injuries, and then to treat that pain. Weeks after the bee sting on the beach, what eventually disrupted my own cycle of pain was my own increasing clarity about why my foot was hurting and a podiatrist who made the right diagnosis. I'd gotten a stress injury by walking more than a mile on my right side of my foot. Since the primary injury, the bee sting, had already healed, a shot of cortisone at the site of the secondary injury was all I needed, and then the rest of my system just started to heal itself. My hope for the town hall this afternoon is that we can together further the congregation's own healing by better understanding the injury that occurred during Reverend Lissa Gundlach's ministry and understand our own responses to it. And I also won't call what happened during Reverend Gundlach's ministry the original pain, because listening to your stories over the past 3 years and knowing that you wrestled a lot about making your previous minister the minister emeritus and such, I believe this congregation was already operating like a body in pain before Lissa arrived. But then the pain continued, and in some ways the cycle ramped up when she was here. Something really important that I've learned about human communities that have suffered the trauma of misconduct is also true for bodies that get bee stings on the foot. The things that we do in response are actually our instinctual ways of protecting ourselves. So even if they end up being hurtful things, like secret keeping, taking sides, avoidance, fight, flight, freeze, all of those things, that is us trying to protect ourselves and protect this congregation. I walked on the outer edge of my foot in order to protect the big toe. You might have kept secrets or avoided hard conversations in order to protect the congregation's unity. You might have taken a side against a minister's critics because you wanted to protect your sense of the minister and her kindness. You might have taken a side against a minister's supporters because you wanted to protect the congregation's integrity. You might have exchanged harsh words or let friendships go. You did things that caused pain because you were trying to help the system right itself. You were trying to avoid that pain. I want all of you to know that this is normal. It's very human. We want to protect ourselves and our congregations from pain. But because we are here today, we can make amends. We can forgive ourselves and forgive others. We can learn a new way. And we can also recognize how much health is already in the body of Neighborhood UU Church. You were injured, but you have so many wonderful, generous, and wise people among you. You have traditions and ways of being that can hold each other and pull this congregation through. The healing has already begun. But now, due to the revelation this week giving you a clearer sense of some of the ways you've been injured, the healing can continue even more. During this time of interim ministry with Teresa, we're given the opportunity to reflect on how we have been with each other, how we will be with each other. We're given the chance to live into a new way of being with one another, one that builds trust, fosters deep relationship, and invites us into our truest, most vulnerable and real selves. Isn't that what religious community is for? This afternoon, you'll have a chance to talk and listen deeply with one another, to share your feelings and your stories. There is deep power in telling your authentic story as individuals and as a congregation. And my home congregation, they did eventually heal, even though it's been 28 years since that misconducting minister left. They still talk about his misconduct in all the new member classes because it's part of their story. It's part of how they became the wonderful, thriving, well-bounded, exciting to be in congregation they are today. They tell the story of how they became wise about boundaries and conflict, how they have become vibrant and joyous. May it be so for you as you write the next chapters of your story.
Meditation to continue deepening our connection to today's theme, right from your seats with a posture that's tall and open. I invite you to join me in singing hymn number 1015 in the field hymnal. Let's sing together, I Know I Can.
I
It's a real pleasure to share the pulpit today with Sarah Gibb-Millsbaugh, who I've known in, I think, the entirety of her 16 years in ministry. She's served very well in congregations, and she's also served our denomination, 2 roles for which I hired her, in our outreach department and also now in our regional staff, and she has an abundance of gifts to offer us, and so I'm glad she's here with us today and in so many other ways. My sister and I often say this to each other. Did we grow up in the same family? And then quite often my mother will chime in, neither of you are describing the family that I raised. You may recognize this dialogue from your own family, because the story that my sister tells, the story that I tell, the story that my mother tells about the very same incident can be completely different. For example, I like to tell the story about our childhood that goes like this. We were latchkey kids, meaning that because my mother was a teacher, my sister and I often got home earlier than her, and we were expected to have dinner ready and on the table by the time she got home. So I learned to cook at a very early age. My sister's story is more like this. Because I was the oldest, I was expected to have supper started, and every once in a while, Teresa helped me. And my mother's story is, every once in a while, the kids surprised me by getting supper started. But mostly, I was an exhausted teacher who had to cook every night when I got home. So which of these stories are the true ones? To some extent, all of them. Mine is a story of self-empowerment. My sister's is a story of responsibility. My mother's is a story about the reality of trying to be a supermom. So how is it that we have all of these different stories? In an article in The Atlantic, Julie Beck explains, a person's story is not a Wikipedia biography of all the facts and events in a life, but rather the way a person integrates those facts, how to pick them apart and weave them internally in a way that helps to make meaning. This narrative becomes a form of identity in which the things someone chooses to include in the story and the way she tells it can both reflect and shape who she is. A life story doesn't just say what happened. It says why it was important, what it means for the person, who the person is, who they'll become, and what happens next. We all pick and choose the things that we remember to support our understanding of our identity, our unique identity. But the thing is, we don't create these stories about ourselves in a vacuum. We're also loaded down with cultural assumptions and family expectations that end up shaping which parts we pay attention to, which parts we claim, which parts we don't claim. We see this with young people right now who often, mostly because of social media, believe that they have to look just like the gorgeous model who is happy all the time. And if they don't, they must be ugly, depressed, certainly different from the norm. In her book, Braving the Wilderness, Brene Brown says, "I now see how owning our own story and loving ourselves through that process is the bravest thing we can ever do." Because the odd thing is, even when the story we tell about ourselves is that we were ugly or unhappy, it's still hard to get rid of those stories. By affirming our own sense of beauty, for example, we have to counter that voice that's inside of us that says there is only one standard for beauty, And those voices are often the voices of people that we love or people that we admire. And so to have the courage to claim your own story, to unearth the true person that you know yourself to be, is incredibly challenging because sometimes it makes us feel alone. You've often heard me say that our brain is hardwired to pay attention to the negative. We do this as a way of protecting ourselves and being alert to danger. And so it takes conscious effort and, yes, courage to stand up to the negative stories that we tell about ourselves. It's also true that we find it difficult to face harmful or painful things in our stories. Of course, nobody wants to consciously bring up things that are painful, much less talk about them with others. Not everything that is painful in our past needs to be talked about with others. But when that painful thing that happened contributes to a story that we tell about ourselves that isn't quite right, that doesn't acknowledge those painful parts, it ends up constricting our stories. It keeps them rigid. We can't learn from them. In that same article in The Atlantic, Manisha Pasupati, a developmental psychologist, talks about how every one of our stories, again, does not need to be told. There's an old adage that everyone has a book inside of them. But, as Christopher Hitchens once said, inside is exactly where it should remain most of the time. But just as there can be consequences to telling everything, there can also be consequences to not telling. If someone is afraid of how people might react to a story and they keep it to themselves, they'll likely miss out on the enrichment that comes from a back and forth conversation. A listener helps you have other things to think about, helps maybe break down the negative story that you've told about yourself. And if you don't talk about it, your memory for the event may be less flexible and give you less chance for growth. The same can be said for cultural stories. What do we say about ourselves as Americans? After the election of 2016, when most of us were in the depths of despair about what the story of America truly had been revealed to be, Valerie Kaur gave us a very different way of understanding the story, without denying the reality of the pain. She said, "The future is dark, but what if? What if this darkness is not the darkness of the tomb, but the darkness of the womb? What if our America is not dead, but a country that is waiting to be born? What if the story of America is one long labor? What if all our grandfathers and grandmothers are standing behind us now, those who survived occupation and genocide, slavery and Jim Crow, detentions and political assault? What if they are whispering in our ear, 'You are brave'? What if this is our nation's greatest transition?" I still remember that speech, and many of you may as well. It made me feel hopeful when I was feeling absolutely hopeless. She was telling a different story than the disastrous one that many of us had in our heads. And it was a different story, but it wasn't a denial story. It took the places of pain and made them into places of promise. The same is true of congregations. It's often tempting in telling the history of a congregation to dwell only on the good things, the heroic story that makes us feel proud of ourselves as members of this church. But as I talked about a few weeks ago, the incompleteness of this story constricts us. It doesn't allow us to learn anything from our past if all we do is dwell on the good. It keeps us from the liberating power of naming the truths, however painful they may be. An interim colleague of mine recently told me about the story of a church she had just recently completed an interim at. And that congregation did not want to become a welcoming congregation, which is UU jargon for churches that have openly embraced queer people and diverse gender identities. Just about every UU church, including this one, has gone through that program to our great benefit. It wasn't without challenges, but most of us learned so much and grew so much in that process. And so my colleague was puzzled by this church's refusal to engage in this program because she didn't experience them as unwelcoming. And so she began to ask more and more questions. Did they try it in the past? Well, it turned out that in the very first meeting that they had tried a decade ago, a fight broke out. Not just a yelling fight, a fist fight. And they were so appalled that that could happen in this congregation that prided itself on how nice they could be to each other, that they did not want to go near that welcoming congregation process again. Until my colleague helped walk them through a different story. And so she helped them build a covenant of right relations, just as you have done here. She helped them learn the resilience of being able to talk about difficult things, just as Sarah talked about in her home church. And so they did finally take up the program and now are a welcoming congregation. She helped them tell a different story about themselves. Not a story that denied that happening, but a story of resilience. This is a congregation of many stories. In your storied history of over 136 years, some of these stories inspire us to keep this church vital so that it may touch people deeply now and in the future, the way it has touched so many people deeply in the past. But some of these stories are not always easy or pleasant to tell. And you have learned that you have the resilience to face even those that make it clear that our forebears here held shameful ideologies that perpetrated great harm on those that they deemed inferior. And doing so with your truth and reconciliation process has enabled you to tell a new story about this church, a story of one that is facing up to the realities of the past and dedicating yourselves to a new ideology and new actions that perpetuate justice and equity. And of course, there's not just one story. Each person here has your own story about how you have experienced this church and its ministers, some of them painful, some of them joyous. Some are still in their infant stages if you are brand new to this church. You don't all have to agree on one story, but it is important to name the things that may have been painful and harmful to quite a number of you, so that we may all learn and grow in new ways that help us make meaning. And in our meeting this afternoon, we will do just that. And what I know about this congregation is that you will learn and grow, just as you have exhibited in so many ways. You can begin to tell a new story about the kind of partnership you hope to have with me as your interim minister and with your newly called minister in a year and a half. You get to choose the story that leads to hope and resilience. We don't have to be stuck in fantasies of the past or only looking at the painful parts. This is all of our work during this interim time, and I know that you are more capable of doing so. And most importantly, we don't have to do it alone. We have one another to talk with. We have great help from the UUA. We have great leaders on the board and transition team who believe in transparency and healing and who believe in the congregation you are yet to be. As Unitarian Universalists, we understand that the story is always unfolding. It does not have a predictable end, and we believe that each of us has a part in the story that is to be. It is a privilege to witness your courage, and it is an honor to be part of the story that you now tell. Thank you.
Our closing hymn is number 1028, Steel Hymnal. Please rise and